What a beautiful Sunday for the Minnesota Vikings. They have clinched the playoffs. It all gets real serious from here. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. My hashtag everydayers. I appreciate y'all so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today on the show, we got a little bit of playoff scenarioing to do. Not scenarios for the Vikings to make the playoffs. That has happened. The Vikings have clinched the playoffs. Sound the alarms. Get your rainmakers out. Get your New Year's little confetti poppers out. It happened. The Vikings will be playing mid to late January football. Whether it's as a wild card or as a home team or as a 1 seed, that's in the cards. That's all got to be hammered out yet. But as it stands right now, the Vikings win out and are likely to get the 1 seed. You technically can't say they control their own destiny because strength of victory is a weird tiebreaker. I am going to inundate you with that later in the show of like what needs to go down with between them and the Eagles. But the Vikings control their own destiny for the NFC North. How about that? This really, really tough as nails division. Thank you to the Green Bay Packers for beating Seattle. Now the Vikings are guaranteed at least to get a wild card if they don't win out, but they could be 15-2. And if they are 15-2, it means they handed a loss to the Lions. And because the Lions lost to the Bills, that would make them 14-3. And the Vikings would be NFC North champs in either the 1 or 2 seed, depending on strength of victory, which the Vikings currently hold that tiebreaker over Philadelphia. But there's a lot to be said about that yet. But before we get into all of the nitty-gritty playoff scenario stuff, also, we're going to do this over-under today. That's where we talk about the betting lines for the upcoming game against the Chicago Bears. But first, boy, the vibe of that game is different than it was last we talked on Friday and when we talked to Lauren Cox. Because back then, on Thursday, an eon ago, the Bears were still technically in the hunt for the playoffs. They've been eliminated now officially by Washington 1, and they were the last team that the Bears could possibly catch, but the Commanders have the tiebreaker over the Bears thanks to that Hail Mary debacle from earlier in the year, and the Commanders win a nail-biter comeback attempt from the Saints, get out of it as they go for 2 instead of kick the extra point to tie it, and they don't get it. Commanders win, and that means the Bears can no longer make the playoffs. And with that, and the Vikings not needing to clinch. They didn't hold the cards in their own hands to clinch. They got it before they even kicked off, right? I wonder how much the vibe of the game changes. Now, I'm a subscriber to ham sandwich theory. That means that, you put 2 NFL football, like professional football teams, guys that have been playing football since they were 8 years old, guys who made this their whole dream, who get paid millions of dollars to be out there. You put a ham sandwich on the line, these guys are going to go all out. At the very least, because a lot of them have contract incentives, all the coaches have, they're all coaching for their jobs possibly, right? Or possibly for new jobs. Somebody like Brian Flores is really going to care. Maybe this affects his head coaching chances. So, put a ham sandwich on the line and everybody's going to go hard, right? You don't need playoff stakes necessarily. For a good example of this, look at the Jets-Jags game from Sunday. 2, 3, and 10 teams, both mathematically eliminated, going at it. Look at that game and tell me those teams didn't care about winning just for the sake of winning. So there's a limit to how much this stuff can, I think, affect a game. Everybody's going to come out and try to win because they're professionals. But and nobody on that field is thinking about draft position. Nobody wants to set up, the Chicago Bears players don't want to set the Bears up to go draft their own replacements. Like they're not thinking that way, right? As much as Bears fans might be thinking about that way. So beautiful. We don't have to be there anymore. The Vikings are making the playoffs. But the Bears are the vibes team, and we've had 2 crossovers with Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears. Go listen to Locked On Bears, by the way. Fantastic. He's lovely. He's awesome. And one of the things we always talked about in both of these was like the vibe of the team. I asked him point blank, like, does this team have quit in it? And he said like some of them do. And we had a similar discussion before the first game, the game at Soldier. So I wonder what kind of effort you get out of the Bears. Because on one hand, they're out of it. A whole bunch of them are getting cut. All the coaches are going to be out now, right? Unless Thomas Brown like gets the job, which feels, I don't know, weird right now. But that's not for me to break down. That's for Lauren to break down. But maybe you get that kind of, head in the sand, navel gazing kind of effort where we're done, and they start feeling down on themselves, right? And that might come down to the beginning of the game, which is maybe the point I'm kind of driving at. But the other kind of effort you get is the cornered animal with nothing to lose. Because on the other hand, the Vikings now are in place to contend for the NFC North in a way they have not yet been this year. They have always needed help, right? They have not controlled their destiny for the NFC North until right now. They got that help from the Buffalo Bills. Thank you, Josh Allen. So they're now suddenly the Vikings are in a spot where the only way to change the outcome as it looks right now, with the Vikings sitting in the 5th seed and traveling to Tampa Bay, probably, or maybe the NFC West winner. The only way that they change that fate is by winning out. So they're now looking at a 4-game stretch, probably needing to win all of them, unless the Lions defense really falls apart here and they drop one to the Bears and drop one to the 49ers or something like that. But I don't think they're going to be relying on that, right? So they're looking at suddenly, like, the pressure's kind of on now to win out. Because now they can. Now it matters. It can matter. So you suddenly have a team in the Vikings with a ton of pressure on it, and a team in the Bears with no pressure on it at all. Pressure makes diamonds, but it doesn't always make diamonds. Sometimes people crack. So who's going to crack, right? I think this is a great little emotional test to go into a month before the playoffs for the Vikings, to like the young players especially, right? Guys like Stephon Gilmore have won Super Bowls, who, by the way, questionable for this game with a hamstring injury. Everybody else off the injury report, except for the IR players and stuff, of course. But so we're happy about that. And Stephon Gilmore practiced on Saturday in a limited capacity, which is great news. I'm going to call him a true game time decision, but if he doesn't play this week, I feel pretty good about his chances next week against the Seattle Seahawks. But regardless, there are a lot of players on the Vikings that have been through playoff situations before. Harrison Phillips was on a couple of those Bills teams. Even somebody like Cam Robinson hasn't been in the playoffs a lot with the Jags, but yeah, he's kissed it a couple times and at least had that vibe, right? That, we've won the division, or we're going to win the division, and had that celebration. And then suddenly that idea of, now suddenly this all really matters for like a much more real reason. You're not just hoping to sneak in and get a chip in a chair. The whole world is in front of you. A bye is in front of you. How do you respond to that? Somebody like Jordan Addison, or somebody like Justin Jefferson, who has one playoff game in his career as an NFL player. Somebody like Sam Darnold, who's never sniffed anything like this. This is going to be Sam Darnold's playoff debut. At least, well, I guess not technically. He was in the playoffs with the 49ers last year, but he didn't play, right? So this is a great test to have right now, because if you don't respond properly to those pressures, you want to know that now with 3 games to iron that out and to get used to that kind of pressure, or at least get used to the idea of that kind of pressure, and know that if the Vikings do blow it on Monday Night Football here, which is totally in the cards, okay? It's a divisional game. It's the second time the Bears have played them. I don't care how bad the Bears are, how bad you think they are. They can absolutely come into US Bank Stadium and give a divisional opponent a run for their money. And you know what? I'm going to say the same thing about them versus the Lions next week. The talent gap no longer matters in the second divisional matchup. Not even really in the first divisional matchup. It's how divisional matchups work, right? The Browns beat the Steelers this year. Like, it happens. So nobody's looking past this one, I don't think. And I think the Vikings, now the pressure's on so much to go strike while the iron is hot and tie up the Lions and like make this the thing. Versus the Bears, who I don't know how many of them are going to care. Or maybe they're going to not care a lot, and that could be their strength. It just changes the dynamic of this game so very much. And I think what we will find out is in the first couple of drives. The first couple of drives will be very informative for a bunch of reasons. One, you're going to get a sense for this emotion. If the Vikings get the ball and they score, and then they stop the Bears, and then they score, it's 14-0. You might see, you like that's where you are putting the vibes of the Bears and that we want to win just for winning's sake. Like you really put pressure on that and put that to the test. But if the Bears come out and they have, this is the same thing I said about the last Bears game. If they come out and they like rattle off a couple explosives and they feel like they're in this, and then they just get to play spoiler and they start having fun, like the last thing you want is for the Bears to look like they're having fun. No fun Bears. That's what we want them to be dejected on the sideline. We want them to be arguing and sad because they gave up a touchdown right away in the opening drive. So that first quarter is going to tell you a lot about the kind of the vibe of this game. But also, it's informative to know, have the Bears changed the way they cover, like what we talked about on Friday? Have the Vikings changed the way that they're going to try to get the ball to Justin Jefferson? Have the Bears decided that that's not going to be an issue anymore? What are the Vikings going to do about no Gervon Dexter in this game? There's backup defensive tackles. Are they going to try to exploit that? Or are they just going to kind of go with their, they're just going to kind of keep trying to pass? Like, what are they going to do about all of that? All very interesting. But now that the Vikings are in the playoffs 100% and that seeding can go from first to fifth in the blink of an eye, we got to talk about these playoff scenarios. That'll be next, followed by those over-under. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. If you are looking at this Viking season and waiting to see how you're going to be disappointed, might I recommend therapy? BetterHelp is online therapy made easy. And their whole deal is that it is suitable to your schedule. It's flexible. It can be all online. It can be all via text. You can schedule it after work hours or whenever works right for you. It can be very important, especially with the holiday season. So give therapy a try, and BetterHelp can hook you up with a therapist they think is right for you. And if they give you somebody that you don't jive with, that it doesn't quite work, no big deal. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So find comfort this December with BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. It is that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff Kickoff Show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, TruTV, TBS, and Max. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. If you're looking for something to tide you over until kickoff tonight, go check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I've got a big, long Dallas Turner breakdown on there. I've got a Jordan Addison breakdown on there if you're just hurting for some propaganda, some really, really excellent stuff, and one on Jalen Redmond from the Falcons game. He kind of had this like crazy breakout. Was that real, or was it just kind of, that fake D-line production that happens sometimes? You can go check all of that out. It's like an hour 20 total of content, so go check it out. Once again, that's patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Let's move on. And I want to go over some playoff scenarios with you now. So here is the lay of the land. There are two other teams the Vikings care about right now, the Lions and the Eagles. What a beautiful thing, right? The two 12-2 teams. That's who they care about. They're not now like scoreboard watching random seventh seeds that they could technically lose out and lose their spot to. I love it so much. Oh my God, we're done with all of that. But the Vikings are sitting at the 5th seed right now. In all likelihood, that's where they end up as a wild card, unless the Packers catch them, which the Packers could be. Like if the Vikings win every game except the Packers and Lions games, I think the Packers then get the 5 seed, the Vikings get the 6 seed, and they go to like the NFC. But what, they're getting one of the wild card games, right? So whatever. Here's the skinny with the Lions. If the Vikings win tonight and they go to 12-2, then you just have to match the Lions. They go 1-1, you go 1-1. they go, they go 2-0, you go 2-0 for the next 2 weeks, and then the Vikings go to Ford Field, and then that would be for the division. That's the goal here, right? We would obviously love if the Lions like fell apart and lost 2 and the Vikings just got the division right away. But even if the Vikings head into that game against the Lions up a game, the Lions would still win tiebreakers if the Vikings and Lions end up tied at the end of it. And that's because the Lions now, one of their losses is against the AFC, which means, just like deductively, is a great kind of shortcut way to figure out that the Lions are, they would have swept the Vikings, so like that matters a lot. But even if the Vikings and Lions, let's say, enter that game, the Vikings are down a game, but they beat the Lions, so they split the series. If it comes down to conference tiebreaker, the Lions have a better conference tiebreaker. So they have the tiebreakers on the Vikings, kind of no matter what. The Vikings have to end up above the Lions, like bar none in record. But if the Vikings win out, headed into that Week 18 game, there's nothing the Lions can do about it. That will be for the division, almost certainly flex to Sunday Night Football, and we're doing the whole thing. And maybe even for the 1 seed. So again, things are high pressure now. The pressure will be on. They are no longer a scrappy little underdog. And they're trying to view themselves as that still, I think. And, everybody's talking about the Lions and the Eagles and people saying, oh, well, maybe the Rams are the third best team or maybe the Packers are the third best team. Well, meanwhile, the Vikings are sitting here going toe-to-toe, going blow for blow basically with all these guys, and their game against the Lions was close, and maybe they feel like, oh, you didn't pay attention enough to us or whatever. They're getting all the bulletin board material that they can, but that's going to be harder to come by when they are a clinched team. They're in the dance somewhere, and they're 11-2 because they stuck a good one on the Atlanta Falcons. I think media is starting to kind of take them seriously. It's like, no, this team is like good. They're hot. They've won 6 in a row. They won 5 in a row to start the year. Like they can, string together these win streaks. Like they can do it. The pressure is on. So we'll see how they respond. But if they want the 1 seed, winning out technically is not enough. So here's the way the tiebreakers work. If they end up tied with the Eagles, right? They win out, they knock the Lions down to the 5 seed. They are going to win the division. And they're either the 1st seed or the 2nd seed in that world. If that happens, the Eagles and Vikings, assuming the Eagles also win out, so they'd both be 15-2, and it would come down to tiebreakers. So here's how the tiebreakers work, by the way. First, it's head-to-head. Vikings haven't played the Eagles. That wouldn't apply. Then it would be conference record. They'd be tied there. Then it would be common games record. They would be tied there. The Eagles don't play the Lions, so they don't have that loss. They did beat the Rams, and the Vikings lost to them, so that's 1 point Eagles. However, the Eagles lost to the Falcons. Vikings beat the Falcons, 1 point Vikings. It would be tied. That would be the only difference. So then it would go to strength of victory in all games. And that's where I don't think we get past that one a lot. The next would be strength of total schedule, but whatever. So strength of victory. So the current win-loss records of the teams that the Philadelphia Eagles have beaten right now, as of this recording, is 76-92. For the Vikings, it is 79-86. They're like 4-ish, 5-ish games ahead on strength of victory right now. Obviously, that does not count things like if the Vikings hand a loss to the Bears tonight. That would add 2 losses because it's 2 of their victories. And has nothing to do that, by the way, that includes the teams that if the Vikings and Eagles won out would have also beaten. So that includes Seattle, and for the Eagles, that's games against Washington, Dallas, New York, etc. So it's close-ish. However, the Eagles would need to, they would need teams that they beat, but that the Vikings did not beat, like the Rams, teams in the AFC North, the Ravens, the Browns, teams like the Saints, to win 5 more games down the stretch than the teams the Vikings beat that are unique to them. Tennessee, Indianapolis, Houston, San Francisco, and yes, Detroit. So it's extraordinarily complicated. Going through all the scenarios is not worth your time. But the point is, the Eagles' strength of victory has a little bit of ground to make up, but it's not insurmountable. So we'd be on strength of victory watch, I guess, at the end. But right now, the Vikings are, we'll call it 3.5 games ahead on strength of victory. It depends, too, on what happens with the Falcons tonight, and then, of course, the Bears, and then it'll be a little bit clearer. But right now, they are at least 3 games ahead on strength of victory. But obviously, if they lose to the Bears, it doesn't matter. So that's where we're at right now. So all that is to say, I think it's reasonable for the Vikings to approach this, hey, we control our own destiny for the 1 seed. More or less you do. You need to strength of victory watch a little bit, but you would also need for the Eagles to make up that deficit. You'd need the Lions to start taking L's. You know, you'd need teams like the 49ers and Texans to start taking more L's, and even though they're going to have like dead in the water AFC South teams on their schedule for the last part. And you would need like NFC East teams like Dallas and New York to start getting wins. It's weird. It's like it will require some upsets to happen in the Eagles' favor. Certainly not impossible, but you would have to start watching weird stuff. So the Vikings, at the end of the day, they can go be 15-2 and get the 1 seed probably. And if they get really unlucky, oh no, the 2 seed, and they're hosting, whatever 7 seed comes in, and whether it's the Commanders or one of the NFC West teams or something. They're in a good spot, and they've earned their right to be in that good spot. But now it's, what do you do with it? Do you go take care of business at home against a completely DOA Bears team, or do they come in and get to play spoiler with you and say, we're leaving here with something in our dead-ass season? Can you go into Ford Field and beat the Lions? That's the biggest question mark in all of this that we don't have to talk about yet. That's a ways away. Can you beat the Packers at home in their winter matchup that the Vikings have totally laid an egg in every single year? Can you beat that? Those are the questions. We can answer them all in due time. For now, we do have a game tonight, and that means we have betting lines, and that means we have a over-under. That will be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode and all of the lines you're about to hear on this over-under are brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to get in on this playoff race NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So whatever it is, whether it's some alternate spread or an alternate total points, you can do something that says 19.5 points will be scored tonight. That's 20 total at 13-10 victory wins. That is minus 50,000. You get absolutely nothing. But if you put $5 down on that, and that's your first bet, you get $150 in bonus bet. So how about a minus 50,000 odds for 30-1? Not so bad. Or if you get a hunch in the middle of a game, let's say the Vikings are ahead at halftime and you feel a collapse coming, you can live bet it at FanDuel. They've got everything you need to make those kinds of decisions, live stats, play-by-play, all in the same place where you actually make the bet. So you've got everything all in one spot. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet, and the FanDuel app has everything you need to place live bets on the NFL. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The Vikings play on Monday Night Football, winter whiteout coming. Wear white if you're going to the game, but for everybody else who wants to maybe gamble, it's time for this over-under. This over-under is where we look at the betting lines for the upcoming Vikings game, and not necessarily, I'm not trying to tell you what I think you should bet on. That's between you and your mirror. But really, I want to look at the betting lines and see if I can't get a sense for where the public is at. After all, by the time we get to game day morning, which is, I'm the night before I'm recording this, but by the time you get to game day, these betting lines are heavily influenced by the public and public opinion, and therefore we can kind of suss out what public opinion is, get out of our little homer bubble, and see where the Vikings are at. So right now, the Vikings are favored by 7 points at minus 102, nearly 50-50 odds, which is unusual. The Bears at plus 7 is minus 120. So what that tells you is that this line has been like this all week long. It has not moved, and people have hammered the Bears. That means a lot more money is on the Bears than on the Vikings, at least on FanDuel, but not quite enough to make FanDuel move the line down to 6.5. which would be a pretty significant hook point, right? So it takes a lot to push them off of that, and I doubt they will at this particular juncture, but you know more about that than I do. You're later in time, future listener. And the over-under here is 44.5. So that implies something like a 26-19 victory, which is a weird number. 27-20, 24-17, something like that. That's where FanDuel is sort of thinking this game ends up. But what we like to do with the player props especially, I like to look at the touchdown scorers. That tells us exactly where the market thinks this game is going to head out. And with touchdown scorers, the Vikings have their normal two who have basically always been minus odds to get a touchdown. That's Aaron Jones at minus 115 and Justin Jefferson at minus 105. The FanDuel has basically always had these guys as greater than 50% to get a touchdown in a given game. Jordan Addison is now joining that party pretty close. He's at plus 135, and those are the top three most likely touchdown scorers for this game. DeAndre Swift is at plus 150, and then you got guys like TJ Hawkinson, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen all clumped up around the 200s, and Rome Odunze is in the high 200s, but that's the touchdown score thing. So they basically are saying, the Vikings are going to have 2 touchdowns, and here are the most likely people: Addison, Jefferson, Jones. That makes quite a bit of sense. TJ Hawkinson at plus 220 is pretty fun odds for me, but that's not what this is about. It's not what this is about. The passing props lines for Sam Darnold at 251.5 at minus 113. It's been a pretty high line for him. But I think the interesting one with Caleb Williams, by the way, 223.5, obviously 1.5 touchdowns is basically always the line for passing touchdowns for quarterbacks. And it's just a matter of what the odds are. Plus 182 for Sam Darnold, or for Caleb Williams, minus 148 for Sam Darnold. So Sam Darnold well over 50-50 to get 2 or more passing touchdowns. Caleb Williams almost 3-1 to get 2 or more passing touchdowns. That's where the market is seeing that. The rushing props are where it gets interesting for me, though. Aaron Jones is at 65.5. 65.5 has been a very default line for him all season long. He's had games where he goes up 70. He's had games where it's 40-50 kind of earlier in the season before we really knew how much work he was going to get versus Ty Chandler versus Cam Akers when he joined and all. And then it's clear that Aaron Jones is the main guy. Now he gets 65.5. But with the injury reports the way they are, the Chicago Bears have had all these problems at defensive tackle. They're down just to the pits of their roster. They're to their practice squad guys there. It's interesting to me that they didn't move that line hasn't moved up anymore. It's still kind of locked into its default spot at minus 113. And DeAndre Swift, on the other hand, 49.5. Again, a very default spot for him. The longest rush is always interesting. DeAndre Swift tends to get his rushing yards on his good days. They do tend to come in explosives. So longest rush for DeAndre Swift is 12.5 versus Aaron Jones. It's 15.5. So to me, I don't know if that's necessarily looking at the explosiveness potential, because the Vikings haven't gotten too many super explosive runs, unless you count 10 plus as explosive, which some stats do, but I don't like to do that. But they get a lot of, if they do get a first down, really good run, it's been a lot more about success rate and getting 6, 7, 8 a clip than rattling off one big 40-yarder, right? That's been their thing. So with the Bears, who have not had as good of a run game, but it feels like it's more predicated on explosiveness, an interesting thing to me. There's also, because it's Monday Night Football, we can go out all kinds of things. There's a lot of defensive props. Kevin Byard, Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, Jonathan Owens, Tremaine, all these players to get an interception. And they're all plus 800-ish. Kevin Byard is the only one with remotely sensible odds at plus 410, and Harrison Smith at plus 700, same as Jalen Johnson at plus 700, and then a whole bunch of Bears. Kind of telling you that even though the passing props for interceptions, Caleb Williams to record an interception is minus 128, and Sam Darnold is minus 102, essentially a full coin flip whether or not he throws a pick, which, oh my God, how far we've come. But who gets that? There are a lot more candidates on the Bears than there are for the Vikings. So again, try to interpret this. What does that tell us? It tells us that the market doesn't necessarily believe that Sam Darnold is more interception prone than Caleb Williams. In fact, it very clearly believes the opposite of that. However, it feels a lot less confident about who the ball hawk is for the Minnesota Vikings. Interestingly, Byron Murphy at plus 900, who leads the Vikings in interceptions and is top 5 in the league in interceptions, is higher than has longer odds than Harrison Smith there. That's maybe an under-researched thing, but again, if I was going to actually give you gambling advice, it's not to do any of these props. I think they're interesting to look at, but these sort of long shot things are not the way the sharps would tell you to do it. But my gambling advice is terrible. Okay, don't listen to me. Do whatever you're going to do. Don't listen. Just throw my gambling advice out. The gambling advice you should listen to comes from my rabbits who love to pick these games. And Zoe is 9-3 on the year. ZD at 6-6, looking to keep this thing a game, but with one more win over ZD, Zoe can actually clinch this thing with 4 games to go, at least in the regular season. However, of course, I'm going to keep doing this in the playoffs. So the Vikings keeping this thing alive also keeps ZD alive. Let's see what they did. As always, part of the drama here is where the Rabbits are when they start. And now I can try to put something in between them. But what's interesting is ZD started to the left of everything, which was on the Chicago side. Zoe started to the right of the plate, which was on the Minnesota side. And they ended up crossing over each other to pick. So ZD actually ends up picking the Vikings while Zoe picks the Chicago Bears plus 7. So if the Bears cover, that means Zoe more or less clinches this thing unless the Vikings string together enough playoff games to give ZD time to come back. But ZD and I will be rooting for the Vikings to cover that 7-point spread. If you are going to the game, make sure you wear white. It is a winter whiteout. Don't wear your purple jersey. Wear a white sweatshirt. Wear something white and have fun. Be safe. It's Monday Night Football. Go have a good, responsible time. I will see you all on the other side of it. We got a postcast coming right after the game. And then, of course, I'll have Tuesday morning. We'll be able to go over everything in a little, with hopefully a clearer head right after the game. But I will see you all for all of that. And as always, Skol.